"I ran into a snake this afternoon," Miss Shepherd said. "It was coming up Parkway. It was a long grey snake, a boa constrictor possibly. It looked poisonous. It was keeping close to the wall and seemed to know its way. I've a feeling it may have been heading for the van." I was relieved that on this occasion she didn't demand that I ring the police, as she regularly did if anything out of the ordinary occurred. Perhaps this was too out of the ordinary, though as it turned out the pet shop in Parkway had been broken into the previous night, so she may have seen a snake. She brought her mug over and I made her a drink, which she took back to the van. "I thought I'd better tell you," she said, "just to be on the safe side. I've had some close shaves with snakes." This encounter with the putative boa constrictor was in the summer of 1971, when Miss Shepherd and her van had for some months been at a permanent halt opposite my house in Camden Town. I'd first come across her a few years previously, standing by her van, stalled as usual, near the convent at the top of the street. The convent, which was to have a subsequent career as the Japanese school, was a gaunt, reformatory-like building that housed a dwindling garrison of aged nuns, and was notable for a striking crucifix attached to the wall overlooking the traffic lights. There was something about the position of Christ, pressing himself against the grim pebble dash beneath the barred windows of the convent, that called up visions of the Stalag and the searchlight, and which had caused us to dub him the Christ of Colditz. Miss Shepherd, not looking uncrucified herself, was standing by her vehicle in an attitude with which I was to become very familiar, left arm extended, with the palm flat against the side of the van to indicate ownership, the right arm summoning anyone who was fool enough to take notice of her, on this occasion me. Nearly 6 foot, she was a commanding figure, and would have been more so had she not been kitted out in greasy raincoat, orange skirt, Ben Hogan golfing cap, and carpet slippers. At this time she would be going on 60. She must have prevailed on me to push the van as far as Albany Street, though I recall nothing of the exchange, but what I do remember, as I trundled the van across Gloucester Bridge, was being overtaken by 2 policemen in a panda car, and thinking that as the van was certainly holding up the traffic, they might have lent a hand. They were wiser than I knew. The other feature of this first run-in with Miss Shepherd was her driving technique. Scarcely had I put my shoulder to the back of the van, an old Bedford, than a long arm was stretched elegantly out of the driver's window to indicate in textbook fashion that she, or rather I, was moving off. A few yards further on, as we were about to turn into Albany Street, the arm emerged again, twirling elaborately in the air to indicate that we were branching left, the movement done with such boneless grace that this section of the highway code might have been choreographed by Petipa, with Ulanova at the wheel. Her "I am coming to a halt" was less poised, as she'd plainly not expected me to give up pushing, and shouted angrily back that it was the other end of Albany Street she wanted, a mile further on. But I'd had enough by this time, and left her there with no thanks for my trouble. Far from it. She even clambered out of the van and came running after me, shouting that I'd no business abandoning her, so that passers-by looked at me as if I'd done some injury to this pathetic scarecrow. Some people, I suppose I thought, feeling foolish that I'd been taken for a ride, or taken her for one, and cross that I'd fared worse than if I'd never lifted a finger. These mixed feelings to be the invariable aftermath of any transaction involving Miss Shepherd. One seldom was able to do her a good turn without some thoughts of strangulation. It must have been a year or so after this, and so sometime in the late 60s, that the van first appeared in our Crescent. In those days the street was still a bit of a mixture. Its large, semi-detached villas had originally been built to house the Victorian middle class. Then it had gone down in the world, and though it had never entirely decayed, many of the villas degenerated into rooming houses, and so were among the earliest candidates for what is now called gentrification, but which was then called knocking through. Young professional couples, many of them in journalism or television, bought up the houses, converted them, and, an invariable feature of such conversions, knocked the basement rooms together to form a large kitchen dining room. In the mid-60s,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?